I set out as a young man to be a military pilot. I should have been flying jet fighters. I read all the physics and chemistry, mathematics of this work. I can still teach them. But by some providence, I ended up in law. And I didn't understand where that was going until in the final year. What we've done in the last 20 years, was to probe into, because I ended up from the law, I had my bid in court, and I ended up in the oil industry. But I left the oil industry in 1998 on account of this. Upstream, I left from senior executive position in the upstream. There's nobody left in NNPC today who can argue with me for 10 minutes on national television on what it costs to produce crude, either on land, in the swamp, in the sea, on the desert. I've dealt with from what you call seismic studies, where you are looking for where you could find, to all of what you do in well development, to what you do in piping it around and processing it until the time you transport it and sell. But why did I leave? Because I came face to face with the document by which Shell and Mobil, Egypt, Earth were operating. And I said to myself, what could this mean? Does it mean we're not the owners of this land? That these foreigners will dictate the terms by which they operate? I'm sure you've seen their signposts, those of you who came from Port Harcourt area. NNPC Shell joint venture, Shell operator. Earth. Anyone you see, the operator is foreign. You have a business, a joint venture. You are not to know what it costs to produce whatever it is that joint venture has to do. It is that foreigner who will write down whatever he writes down, and whatever he declares as profit is what you now share. So I began to ask myself, how did we get to that? And it's not a 2-year contract, it was a 50-year lease. Signed off between 1967 and 1969 by people who could not even read properly what was written, under circumstances in which they just signed first and it was explained to them later. How did we even arrive at that point in 1967? We began to probe. It came to where I had to leave everything else to say let's even, because we found out there was nothing to be found in our archives. We asked some of our elders, people with gray hair, people who went to negotiate the independence for Nigeria. I happen to have spent plenty of time with the last of them who were alive in course of the last 20 years at least. And Nohoro, for instance, spent the last 7 years of his life trying to undo what they did in going to sign us up into this union. We shouldn't have been. But first things first, the research from the known to the unknown led us to where we had to go to. You know the way WikiLeaks gets its information? We had to get the information we were looking for by all means. We broke into the British archives using all available technologies. And by the time we saw what was in black and white, some of them with instructions that they should not be typed, because any day the wrong eyes see them, the whole edifice will come crashing down. Those documents are inside this room now. And we traced things from that way back to what became 1914. And from that 1914, before 1914, when we landed in 1900, when I'm sure some of you might have heard about the Royal Naija Company, that the British had to pay £865,000 to take over the trading areas in what they consolidated in readiness for the annexation of Southern Protectorate with the Northern Protectorate. That question of paying £865,000 at that time, somebody bought something from somewhere, and that person is still the owner of that piece of estate. The Nigeria you have, yes, hold it there. The Nigeria you have is a joint venture. You saw Prince Charles the other day, and he came. You saw the sitting arrangements. We've not moved from where we were as at that time they created the union. It was a business venture. It was the trade of the era to go to wherever you can, beat them down, take whatever you can. So the British, the French, everybody was doing their own everywhere. But what became Nigeria was where the British had come towards this axis, and they managed to make their first landings. I'm sure you know about the Lagos Colonial of 1861, how Kosoko and Dosomo, like that, the oil rivers. They came from the Atlantic waterfronts, entered into trade treaties and protection treaties with some of those trading partners in little bits and patches. Those treaties, dating back to the 1840s, 50s, 60s, and all of that, was what the British had in their hands. At the time, they were pushing northwards. This is Atlantic. You see Lagos there, you see Port Harcourt here. This is the Atlantic waterfront. These British came. You can see that apart from River Niger, the map is divided into two sides. The British entered from this side, and all the parts in that lower part were already in their hands at the time. On the other side, I'm sure you all remember the jihad, which we still have. You remember that they were foreigners too who invaded, landed in Sokoto, 1804, and conquered the portion in green, the portion in green in your map. They overran them. 1804, the British came in the 1860s. That means they were here 60 years before the British got here. Now, having secured that portion that you see in green, they were pushing downwards. They also wanted to get to the Atlantic waterfront. The British wanted to get to what was left on the east. On the eastern side is Cameroon. On the northeastern side is Chad, then Niger, and then Benin Republic to the left. The French had already taken all of the other places. The British would have pushed all the way to here, if not for that caliphate that was already occupying here and pushing downwards. They met halfway in a fight that happened in the Ilorin-Benue axis. Caliphate coming to the ocean, the British trying to secure the balance of the land. After a short while, it occurred to them, we're on the same mission, oh boy. Two robbery gangs after the same target. Say, why do we fight ourselves? Why don't you bring what you have? I bring what I have. We consolidate it so that we can share the benefit of having it permanently. And that was what became the amalgamation of 1914. Every document that transpired between them is in our possession, lodged in libraries across the world. Whatever they choose to do is already too late to be able to reverse the actions that have been initiated to salvage ourselves from what they've landed us into. Now, having reached that agreement, I'm sure some of us recall when the Caliphate were talking about dipping their Quran into the Atlantic Ocean. That is, they were telling the British at the time this matter of Nigeria, because it was for them a matter of conquest. That is, they had to conquer. But the British came with something else. They said, well, whenever you guys are done with whatever you came to do, we'll push on until we dip our Quran into the Atlantic Ocean. Anybody here ever heard about that? Wonderful. Now, the document of the amalgamation was one in which, I'm sure, who are the ones from South Africa here? Good. The apartheid, what the Boers did in South Africa was exactly what the Fulani did with their British friends over our heads here to make this place their own over the heads of the owners of all the lands. A master-servant relationship. This is an excerpt from a telegram from the Secretary for the Colonies explaining what they were about to do, because they didn't tell anybody in southern Nigeria that they were going to lump us together with the people of the north. The discussion was strictly between them and that caliphate. It was a German newspaper that leaked it for the first time on the 26th of December in 1913. It took almost 15 years of day and night exchanges, meetings, travels to piece together all those parcels of land that came under those treaties. They didn't tell them where it was all going. Everybody thought they were still, the Shekiri thought they were still in their treaty. The Lagos Colony thought they were still in their treaty. Everybody, the British was tiptoeing over their head, merging them. It was in 1906 that they merged the entire southern territories to become the protectorate of southern Nigeria. From that 1906, they then began to merge the systems, two mortally opposed civilizations, because on the other side, Sharia was already in place. They came as jihad. How do you create one political union with a group that owes it a duty of faith to kill the infidel? That duty never changes. No matter how you settle all the other things, the duty will never go away. You are the infidel, you have to be killed. They have a right in that their faith to lie to you. They call it taqiyya. They deceive you into thinking you are in another business until you get killed. And they are also of a feudalist worldview. You know what feudalism is? All men are not born equal. No matter what you do, what you achieve, you are no more than the slave you are to them, even if they have nothing or no education. Between the two, a terrible alchemy that as a slave, you dare not compete with your master for the ownership or control of whatever. The slave does not have a right to anything, no right to property, not even right to life. You can do away with your slave, kill your slave. And that was the civilization that was already in place, and the British knew. But they were also, they too were, what do we call them? They were feudalists too. And one thing led to the other. Eventually, they were able to piece it all together. That I'm now reading from that cablegram. Secretary of State, Secretary for the Colonies, his name was Harcourt, the one after which Port Harcourt was named. He says, in explaining what was about to happen the day before it did come public, that we have released northern Nigeria from the leading strings of the treasury. The promising and well-conducted youth is now on an allowance of his own and is about to effect an alliance with the southern lady of means. I have issued the special license, and Sir Frederick Lugard will perform the ceremony. May the union be fruitful and the couple constant. Secretary for the Colonies, Lord Harcourt, boss of Lord Frederick Lugard, referring to the import and purport of the annexation of the then Protectorate of Southern Nigeria to the Protectorate of Northern Nigeria. So what they reported to you as amalgamation, as if there was some coming together of equals, was actually an annexation. And the purpose, what the British came to do, back to that map, please. Back to the map where what the British came in search of were all on this axis. But the people they met here provided resistance. You know what they call resistance? They fought and fought and fought to make a landing. I'm sure there are Yoruba people here. I'm sure some of you have heard your song many, many times. If I begin it, will you be able to join me to end it? It begins, Eyo, 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 Bantawa, Ton fi góòlù ń ṣeré, àwa ò lè sanwó ní bòde, òdìlé. The clause I want you to take from it. Àwa ò lè sanwó ní bòde, òdìlé. Your great-grandfathers fought the British for years and years, preventing them from landing. And your song you sang now was the victory song composed. We will never pay custom duty to these foreigners on our waters. Today, 58 years into your independence, you are paying that customs religiously to people from this part. And from independence to date, not one of you had ever qualified to be Controller General of Customs. Now, I can give you up to 20 of these kind of examples. Who has ever been to Lagos Island, the Victoria Island here? Does anybody know where Bonny Camp is? Does anybody know where Eco Hotel is? The road that goes from the front of Bonny Camp to Eco Hotel, what's the name of that road? Ahmadu Bello Way. When you stand on Ahmadu Bello Way, is there any other thing to do to go to the ocean? You are on the last firm piece of land before the Atlantic. Have they not dipped their Quran into the Atlantic? Who collects the rent? The landlord or whoever? It's not the landlord that collects the rent. They take away over 2 trillion from these port operations every year. I won't call it misfortune. It so happened that a few months after Tinubu handed over to Fashola, we were at an event. He sat next to me. He was to speak before me. He finished, and I took over the microphone, and I asked him, I said, Governor Emeritus, in the 8 years you were governor here, what was the maximum sum you got from federal allocation? He was quick to remember. There was 73 billion naira. I had documents with me in that event showing that in all those 8 years, Nigeria did not take away anything less than 1.6 trillion as from port operation alone. 10% of 1.6 trillion is 160 billion. 5% therefore, 80 billion. Lagos getting 73 billion in the maximum meant that Lagos in those 8 years did not get even 5% of what Nigeria was taking away from their place. The event collapsed. It was a blue roof in Ikeja here. The event collapsed when, amidst all that noise, because I had come to tell them what we were doing, that if we do not act together to recover this land, you are not only going to remain the slaves you have been since that time, they will kill you and take your land and become the new owners to eliminate future claims. At the time these things were happening, we had also, in this project, we had also gone around the country whispering at that time to the other people who were in the same danger. Nobody will listen. Back to how we've arrived at 1914. Therefore, Nigeria was, as at that time, intended to be a marriage between the northern and the southern lady of means. I'm sure you hear about oil industry, Ijo, blah, blah, blah. Who has been to Owerri here before? Does anybody know where they call Shell Camp in Owerri? Is there anybody here who has ever heard about Shell Camp in Owerri? There's a place called Shell Camp. I'm sure you do not know that Shell was headquartered in that place for 42 years going to Port Harcourt in 1960. And it's not a small facility. You know the Modotel Hotel that has become Rockview? That's the gate area. Government House Owerri, the whole of that government house, was inside that facility. Avanikoku, the university, was inside that facility. The Federal Medical Center after the university was inside that facility. That's on one side of the road. On the other side, the whole of that mobile police camp, all the way to back of prison. All these listed were fenced together as the headquarters of Shell for those 42 years. They went to Port Harcourt in 1960, and M.I. Okpara, as Premier of Eastern Region, bought that property. Then Owerri was a provincial capital. Why did they go to Port Harcourt? Because the pretense that they were dealing with some Niger Delta, some people that could not be properly described. They just wanted to create a woolly condition around that discussion because the Igbo fought them. Obarewe, the Oba in Benin, you know how it ended. The King Jaja of Opobo, the one they had to send on exile, who migrated by himself from Amibo, next to Nkwere. That's where he came from. Now, what was going on? I'm sure you know Rumo Mashi and Rumo this and that and that. That was when, and why did they do that? They had sold your oil for 50 years before they declared Oloibiri. All the story you hear about Oloibiri, false. This oil was used in the First World War, in the Second World War.